Now, many of us have probably never heard of Ruby Ridge, or at least not the full story, which is a controversy in 1992 that led to the death of Victoria Weaver, her 14-year-old son Samuel Weaver, and U.S. Marshal William Deegan. Some claim it to be a government militarization and an act of tyranny against an innocent family man, while others say that it was just a crazy white supremacist in the woods who wanted an all-out fight with the feds. Yet not many of us know what truly happened during this 11-day siege of the Weaver residence, and what led up to this catastrophe in the first place. Today, I want to go over with you what really happened, from both the Weaver family's perspective and also the federal government's perspective, so that we, as the ones on the outside looking in, can know the truth of what actually went down, and lay this story of controversy to rest. This is just a disclaimer. There will be verbal depictions of events that take place that might be disturbing for some, so if that's you, here's your warning. Sign off now or forever hold your peace. To start this journey off right, we'll have to go back to Iowa in 1970. Randy Weaver, who dropped out of college 2 years prior to serve in the U.S. Army during the beginning of the Vietnam War, was home on leave when he met Victoria Jordison. The two soon began to be closely intertwined and deeply in love. They bonded over their love of the outdoors, religion, and other similar interests. They wasted practically no time, getting married 1 year later in 1971, 1 month after Randy had been honorably discharged, leaving the Army at the rank of sergeant. Randy and Vicky had done some traveling together after they were married, and further bonded over their love of the mountains and nature. The two were both highly religious, but failing to find a church or community that fit with their Old Testament views. Due to the repeated butting heads with local church leaders, Randy and Vicky became jaded with organized ideological groups and decided against looking for any further group to be associated with, according to their eldest child, Sarah Weaver. This led to them having shallow roots in Iowa and opened them up to being more nomadic. Soon after the birth of their second child, Samuel, Randy's factory job at John Deere fell into danger due to a farming crisis in Iowa at the time. Randy and Vicky had seen the farming issue, amongst other critical issues in the nation, as the writing on the wall to what they had feared most. They believed that the end of times were coming soon and needed to prepare for the collapse of society that they felt was imminent. So the small family decided to pack up and move to Ruby Ridge, Idaho, to escape what they saw as the beginning of the end. This would further accelerate the deterioration of their already crippling faith in the U.S. government and would breed further mistrust in the system. In 1983, the Weavers bought a 20-acre plot of land and went to work on construction and living the self-sustained life that few dream about. They had managed to build a small plywood cabin with some extra amenities on the property, such as a water storage tank, a small garden, a guest shed, and an outhouse. During this time of mountainous living, they became accepted by the small rural community and were friends with many folks in the area. Sometime in the beginning of 1984, members from the Aryan Brotherhood reached out. Seeing Randy's similar distrust in the government, they offered him to come by and check out the compound that was 70 miles south from their newly established home. Randy obliged the offer and brought his family to the annual World Aryan Congress meeting held at Hayden Lake. Now, despite many third-party sources claiming that Weaver was a self-proclaimed white supremacist who spoke out against Jews on multiple occasions, this is controversial. From the testimonies of Randy, his wife and children, along with the initial FBI and Secret Service investigators, they all claim that Randy went down to Hayden Lake compound to generally socialize and never showed an interest in membership. In FBI reports, it stated Randy and his family had only visited the compound a total of 4 times. And in a testimony by Sarah Weaver, she said that those times were because the Aryans were throwing a family-friendly meet and greet type picnic during their World Aryan Congress meetings. Only later down the road, during the ATS investigations leading up to the standoff, did any government agencies bring up allegations of Randy being a member to the Aryan Brotherhood. Now, I'm not saying Randy was or wasn't a white supremacist. I'm just saying that it sounds a little sus to me that this guy gets painted as a hardcore white supremacist right before the feds went and massacred his family. Regardless, even though Randy didn't pursue a membership with the Aryans, he maintained a few friends who still happened to be a part of the organization. This would eventually be a contributing factor to his downfall, but we'll get into that in a minute. Randy and Vicky were described by their neighbors and friends as very religious and likable individuals who were very open-minded to a certain degree, but also not afraid to tell you how they really felt. They were very open to working with people, Not only did they allow Kevin Harris to live on the property off and on as he pleased for 10 years, due to him having a very rough time at home since his father died when he was 2, they also allowed Terry Kinnison to build a house on their land for a fee of $3,000 in 1984. This eventually led to a falling out between Randy and Terry, and from what I can understand, Terry tried to withhold his payment to Randy. This led to a lawsuit that the Weavers had won, and Kinnison was mandated by the courts to pay an extra $2,100 on top of the initial $3,000. Kinnison was so enraged that he wrote letters to the FBI, the Secret Service, and the county sheriff, in which he alleged that Randy Weaver had threatened to kill Pope John Paul II, President Ronald Reagan, and Idaho Governor John Evans. The FBI and Secret Service promptly led an investigation into the allegations in January 1985. In February, Weaver and his wife were interviewed by 2 FBI agents, 2 Secret Service agents, the Boundary County Sheriff, and his chief investigator. The letter sent to the Secret Service by Kinnison claimed that Weaver was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. These claims were ultimately false, but the investigators did note that Randy still had ties to the Aryan Nation due to his friendships with certain members, as I stated earlier. Ultimately, the FBI concluded the investigation after nothing was found to be out of the ordinary, but the FBI made sure to keep tabs on the Weavers, knowing that Randy's friendships would come in hand later down the road. Over the years, everything died down with the feds, and the Weavers maintained their new quiet homestead in the hills. Vicky took it upon herself to homeschool the children, and in her eyes, raise them right in a world full of corruption. She taught the children everything from mathematics to household chores, while Randy taught the kids about survival techniques, such as what to do when encountering wild animals, and how to live a ranching lifestyle. The years were quiet and normal for what you can expect out of a family living in northern Idaho. Even at one point, Randy ran for Boundary County Sheriff in 1988, maintaining his personal beliefs about abolishing taxation and government overreach. Based. However, this clean streak wouldn't last, and the Weavers ran into financial trouble. They didn't have a lot of money due to prioritizing their homesteading lifestyle, and the income they would make from ranching and other jobs they undertook just wouldn't cut it. This led to the Weavers being in a bit of a financial bind. In October 1989, Randy, needing money, agreed to a deal with Gus Magasano of sawing off the barrels of 2 shotguns purchased by Magasano in exchange for $500, which is more money than the shotguns were even worth. Obviously, this enticing offer was taken by Randy, but unbeknownst to him at the time, he had just made a deal with the devil. For the record, keep in mind sawing off shotgun barrels is only illegal if you don't have an FFL and pay your $200 annual tax to the government. So on the level of severity and crime, this is pretty low on the scale if you're just allowed to pay to play and that magically makes it no longer a crime. Regardless of all that, the man Randy thought he knew, Gus Magasano, was actually an ATF agent by the name of Kenneth Fadley. Randy would later figure this out by himself the following month of November, but by that time it was already too late. Before any charges were ever put against Randy, the feds finally showed their full hand. Agents undergoing the case reached out to Randy to strike a deal. Essentially, the ATF wanted Randy to use his friendships to get him into the Aryan Brotherhood's compound and spy on the daily dealings of the group. The feds were hoping to back Randy into a corner and force him to spy, claiming that they would drop the charges if he obliged. Well, Randy did what no one saw coming. Randy refused the offer, claiming that due to the federal agents telling him to saw off the shotgun barrels, that it was entrapment. Which is right. It is entrapment. Regardless, illegal weapons charges were filed against Randy in June of 1990. Also, for whatever reason, the ATF at this time had made claims that Weaver was a bank robber with multiple convictions. How the ATF managed to come to this conclusion, I have no idea, but then again, it's still pretty sus. Only later during the Ruby Ridge trials in 1995 were these claims proven false, showing that Weaver had no criminal record of any kind. Due to these false accusations, the ATF concluded that it would be too dangerous to just arrest Weaver at his home, and a sting operation had been set in motion. On January 17, 1991, while driving home with his wife Vicky, Randy had noticed a few broken down motorists stranded on the side of the road during the middle of winter. And being the types of folks the Weavers were, they pulled over to give them a hand. This would be a mistake. As soon as Randy had stepped out of the vehicle, the facade faded and guns began to get drawn on the couple. Randy and Vicky were then thrown to the snow, searched, and arrested. Vicky would eventually be released, but not before having her pistol confiscated by the cops. Randy was then taken and later released after he had leveraged his house to pay for the $10,000 bail bond. During this time, the courts really put a large amount of pressure on the Weavers. Before being released on bond, Randy was told by the judge that if he loses this case, that means he'll lose his land, which would leave Vicky homeless, and that the government would take away his kids. Vicky, seeing her husband in distress and feeling emotional herself, wrote 2 harsh and ill-received letters to the U.S. Attorney Maurice Ellsworth, addressing him as the Queen of Babylon on January 22nd and February 3rd of 1991. In her letters, she stated, "The stink of your lawless government has reached heaven." She also wrote, "Whether we live or whether we die, we will not bow to your evil commandments." Ellsworth never responded back to her. On February 5th, due to expected travel concerns of President's Day weekend, Randy's initial court date of February 19, 1991 got changed to the following day of February 20th. Yet, when Randy had received his letter in the mail about the date change, his had stated the wrong date. Randy's letter had read the date change as March 20th, a whole 1 month after he was supposed to be seen in court. Weaver's attorney had also received a letter with the same incorrect date, as well as Weaver's assigned probation officer even contacting him and telling him the wrong date as well. So, I'm not sure if we could chalk this up to a complete accident, or if it was some twisted plan by the agents after Weaver had refused to help them. All I can say for certain is that it would lead down a path of extremely unfortunate events to come. The judge would put on a bench warrant for Weaver on February 20th after he failed to appear in court. After receiving the warrant, but hearing of the confusion with the wrong dates of the letters given to Randy, his attorney, and the parole officer, the United States Marshal Service wanted to allow Weaver to show up for what he thought was the correct court date. During this waiting period, a letter came forward on March 5th from Bill and Judy Grider, who were friends of the Weavers and would occasionally bring them groceries. The letter stated, "We will not obey your lawless government," and was signed by Randy and Vicky. This letter had been written due to a few reasons. One, the Weavers were highly skeptical of why the confusion with the court date happened in the first place. 2, they were hearing from friends in the area who had dropped by that Randy already had a warrant out for his arrest and that he probably wouldn't receive a fair trial. And finally, 3, they were being told by some media reports on the radio that he was probably not going to live to see his court date, according to an account from Sarah Weaver. If the Weavers had any faith in the government left, it was lost in that letter. Once the U.S. Marshal Service had received the letter, they assumed that waiting for Randy to show up for March 20th would be pointless. So on March 14, 1991, the U.S. Marshal Service had the go-ahead of the federal grand jury of Idaho to launch a 3-phase plan to bring down Weaver. The first phase would be to conduct a surveillance of the Weaver property. The second phase would be to install cameras on the property for 24-hour unmanned surveillance. And the third and final phase would be the actual arrest of Randy. This operation would take a total of 18 months and had a whole slew of contradictory reports made in the process. As I stated earlier, the ATF made erroneous reports about Randy being a convicted bank robber. The FBI also failed to properly update their ever-expanding file on the Weavers to make it seem as if Randy was, and I quote, extremely violent and suicidal. The feds and local law enforcement agencies would later be highly criticized for this in the 1995 court case, stating during the trial that the assumptions of federal and some state and local law enforcement personnel about Weaver was that he was a Green Beret, that he would shoot on sight anyone who attempted to arrest him, that he had collected certain types of arms, that he had booby-trapped and tunneled his property, exaggerated the threat he posed. In federal documents on the investigation leading up to the operation, they had stated that Randy and his family had built a fortified compound instead of just the small plywood cabin they actually had. There was also a report made by the news crew hired to do a flyover of the cabin that they were shot at by Randy on April 18, 1992, but U.S. Marshals setting up cameras in the area reported that no shots were fired. Why the news crew said this, I have no idea, but can you really expect anything less from reporters? Their disregard for the truth knows no bounds. Regardless of all these false accusations, I will have to give credit where credit is due. The U.S. Marshals did attempt to coax Randy and his family off the hill prior to the standoff by employing the help of neighbors in the area, but these multiple attempts were very unsuccessful. Although, this still doesn't forgive the absolute negligence that occurred before, during, and after the operation. I'm sorry, but how do you have cameras, audio equipment, along with multiple ATF, FBI, US Marshal, and local law enforcement teams watching the Weavers 24/7 for 18 months and come to these conclusions? Despite all these accusations, a plan for the apprehension of Randy was growing ever closer by the day. On May 27, 1992, the Department of Justice reports leading up to the raid made it clear that they wanted the participating agencies to avoid using lethal or non-lethal ammunition to make an arrest of Weaver so as to not bring harm to Vicky or the children. This unfortunately wouldn't be adhered to because just one day before the siege, on August 20th, 1992, Deputy Marshals Roderick, Cooper, Deegan, and Hunt, along with local marshals and deputy sheriffs, were documented using the firing range west of Spokane, Washington, to use their lethal firearms. So, now the stage is set. The untrusting and resistant Weavers, completely oblivious to what is about to take place residing on their property, along with the federal and local law enforcement just less than a mile away, hoping to apprehend what they have been led to believe as a crazed and extremely violent man. At 4:30 a.m. on Friday, August 21st, 1992, the Marshal Service teams had arrived at the Raw residence and proceeded to park their vehicles and move into surveillance positions on Ruby Ridge. The team had split up into two 3-man teams at the Y intersection of the logging trails. The observation team, Hunt, Norris, and Thomas, went to the site above the Weaver property, while the reconnaissance team, Roderick, Cooper, and Deegan, proceeded up the Y trail and stopped 200 meters short of the Weaver home. As the teams lied in wait, at just around 10 a.m., the neighbors who had lived at the foot of the hill had started their pickup truck. This had alerted the family dog Striker, which then trotted towards the bottom of the hill. Randy, Kevin, and Sammy had thought that it was some kind of game animal, and they followed in suit, hoping to score. The recon team, seeing that they were about to be spotted, retreated back down the trail 450 meters to their original position at the base of the Y intersection and laid down in a concealed position. Sammy and Kevin followed Striker on foot through the woods on one logging trail, while Randy took a separate logging trail to meet at the base of the Y intersection. Vicky, Sarah, Rachel, and baby Elshaba remained in the cabin. While Randy walked down his trail, he made it to the base of the Y intersection first and had encountered Marshals Roderick and Cooper, who both identified themselves as U.S. Marshals. Randy then attempted to fire a warning shot in the air to alert Kevin and Sammy of the concealed recon team, but his shotgun had jammed, which led to him running back to the cabin. By the account of the Marshals, Sammy and Striker came out of the woods about a minute later, followed by Kevin. Striker walked towards the bushes and roughly gave away the recon team's position, which in turn led to Marshal Roderick shooting the dog in the back and alerting Sammy, who yelled in anger, "You shot my dog, you SOB," followed by a sporadic 3 rounds out of his Mini 14 in the direction of the Marshals. As soon as the firefight began, Randy began to yell to the boys to get back home. During these initial shots, Kevin promptly took cover and searched for where the fire was coming from. Sammy, out of fear, promptly pulled a full 180 and was retreating back up the hill to find some concealment in the bushes. Then Marshals, Cooper and Deegan, who just took receiving fire, promptly shot the fleeing 14-year-old, hitting him once in the right elbow, fired by Deegan out of his M16, and a fatal shot to the back by Cooper out of his 9mm SMG. In retaliation, Kevin fired in the direction of Deegan and missed, as Deegan was moving 20 meters from left to right while engaging Sammy. As Deegan moved in front of Cooper's position, he had taken a few rounds in the back from Cooper's SMG, killing the highly decorated Marshal. Guys, let me tell you, blue on blue fire is no joke. Be constantly aware of your surroundings and especially your team. Also, for the record, Kevin was accused of killing Deegan, and everyone, especially the media, claims this to be true. But the evidence shows that there were rounds that had penetrated through Deegan's backpack out of Cooper's SMG. Kevin was also cleared of all charges and shown to not be at fault for Deegan's death. So, just wanted to clear that up, since all the jokers writing about what happened can't seem to understand what facts are or how to find them apparently. In the shock and confusion of the firefight, Kevin managed to break contact and sprint back to the cabin after briefly checking on Sammy to find out he was gone. The observation team, Hunt, Thomas, and Norris, had heard the gunshots at the beginning of the altercation and rushed down the hill to meet up with the recon team. Hunt and Thomas went to a neighbor's house to call for the medevac, while everyone else stayed with Deegan's body. This call had alerted the U.S. Marshal Crisis Center, the U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group, the FBI Hostage Rescue Team, the Idaho State Critical Response Team, and the National Guard. Once Kevin had made back to the cabin and informed the Weavers of what had happened, Vicky and Randy, with tears in their eyes, went down to get the body of their son. They wrapped him in a sheet and put him in the guest shed until they figured out what to do. The end of the initial altercation at 11:20 a.m. led to a silence between both sides, until the following day, when Randy, Sarah, and Kevin went out to check on Sammy's body. Unbeknownst to the Weavers, the FBI had placed their hostage rescue team on a hill 200 meters away, overlooking the property, and gave them the following rules of engagement. 1. If any adult male in the area around the cabin is observed with a weapon after the surrender announcement has been made, deadly force could and should be used to neutralize the individual. 2. If any adult male is observed with a weapon prior to the announcement, deadly force can and should be employed if the shot can be taken without endangering any children. 3. If compromised by any dog, the dog can be taken out. 4. Any subjects other than Randy Weaver, Vicky Weaver, or Kevin Harris presenting threat of death or grievous bodily harm, FBI rules of deadly force apply. Deadly force can be utilized to prevent the death or grievous bodily injury to oneself or that of another. The HRT on the hill had claimed that the ROEs from the FBI headquarters was to shoot Randy on sight and take him out. So when given the opportunity to do so, at 6 p.m. on August 22nd, HRT sniper Lon Horiuchi, seeing that Randy was holding Sammy's Mini 14 in his left hand, took his shot. While Weaver was turning the doorknob of the shed, he was hit, and the round had penetrated through his right shoulder blade and exited his armpit. In Randy's personal account, he said that he thought the shooter was right behind him and quickly turned. This led to a domino effect of Vicky opening the front door and briefly stepping out onto the porch of the cabin to find out what was happening, with 10-month-old Elsheba in her arms. Sarah was then pushing Randy to rush him into the house, and Kevin was trailing the two. Vicky, seeing the three rush towards her, backed up and got behind the door of the cabin to prop it open and help them get inside. Just as Kevin was right next to Vicky, a second round from Horiuchi's rifle came through the window into the door and had collided with Vicky's jaw, exiting out of her carotid artery, killing her instantly, and seriously wounding Kevin, tearing through his left bicep and entering his chest cavity, stopping just short of hitting his heart. Parts of bone fragments from Vicky's jaw even hit Sarah in the face. Directly after the incident, Horiuchi filled out a FD 302 file, which entailed a sketch of what Horiuchi saw as he took the second shot. In Randy's opinion, it showed the silhouette of Vicky and Elsheba, but obviously this picture is very poorly drawn. Maybe on purpose, maybe not. All we can say for certain is that Horiuchi took a negligent second shot and killed an otherwise innocent woman. After the assassination attempt, Sarah and Randy both helped to treat Kevin as best they could and clean and cover up Vicky's body, which they kept in the cabin with them for the next several days, out of fear that they would be shot if they went outside or even showed their faces in the window. Just a little after 6:30 p.m., FBI negotiators and armored personnel carriers rolled up to the cabin and over a bullhorn made a brief attempt to inform Randy of the arrest warrants and implored him to negotiate. No response from the cabin was given. This would be the first time that negotiations would be offered, which is a little late in the game if you ask me. Oh, killing Randy didn't work? Well, I guess we should probably try and negotiate now. Idiots. On the following day of the 23rd, at 8 a.m., the FBI ordered the APCs to demolish the shed and other surrounding structures, which I can understand from a tactical point of view as clearing your fields of fire, but the FBI should have known that Sammy's body was in the shed from the constant surveillance they took of the property. Either way, as the APCs attempted to demolish the shed, they found Sammy's body, and they properly retrieved it before backing off the hill, which I'm glad they did. There's no need to run over a dead 14-year-old, regardless of the tactical advantage you would have received otherwise. At least the National Guard had some sense in all this. By the time Monday and Tuesday had passed, little to no communication occurred between both sides. But the ATF, U.S. Marshals, and FBI all took this time to bring in over 400 federal agents to surround the Weber cabin and set up a rather large base camp. This is not including the unspecified amount of local and state law enforcement, along with the National Guard who were also present before the reinforcements were called. As Wednesday the 26th rolled around, Kevin was in extremely rough shape and just wanted to end his suffering. Luckily, Randy and Sarah kept Kevin alive, despite the excruciating pain. During this time, constant calls came over the bullhorn from the APCs for Vicky and the kids to come out. Every morning for the next several days, they would say, "Come on out, Vicky. Bring the kids, we're having pancakes. In an account from Sarah Weaver, she stated that it felt like they were just purposely agitating Randy to get him to do something stupid to get himself killed. Sarah began to become hopeless, seeing how the situation was unfolding and prepared for her family to be slaughtered at the hands of the government. Sarah was so fearful that they would kill everybody in the cabin and then paint them as the bad guys, that she wrote a 6-page handwritten statement that she made Kevin sign and would keep on her person in case her fears became a reality. This letter would later be shown in court during Kevin Harris's trial. In the account of the agents on scene, they all claimed that they knew nothing of Vicky's death and just wanted to resolve the situation by hopefully having Vicky bring the kids out without incident. Sarah Weaver also stated in her testimony that at one point in the day, the FBI negotiators drove up a robot with a telephone in hand to get Weaver to negotiate. The only problem was that there was a shotgun pointed right at the telephone, so you could imagine they didn't pick it up. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this is, due to her being a young 16-year-old who was trying to deal with the psychological trauma of a dead mother, a dead little brother, an extremely wounded Kevin begging to be put out of his misery, and your father just being shot for walking outside. But either way, the bullhorn and robot tactics weren't working. It wasn't until 3 p.m. in the afternoon that Randy had asked to speak to his sister. So the following day of Thursday the 27th, the feds had brought in Randy's sister, Marin's Joy, to communicate with Randy. The only problem was that they wouldn't let her anywhere near the cabin, and they also wouldn't allow her to use a bullhorn to communicate, which all the Weavers said that they found very off-putting. This led to Randy not being able to hear Marin's and vice versa. Randy, seeing that the feds wouldn't allow his sister to come close to the cabin, got even more hopeless in his predicament. But on Friday the 28th, a man by the name of Bo Greitz would enter the scene. Bo was a highly decorated Green Beret who had heard of the siege on the news and wanted to do something about it. Most likely for political clout because he was running for president that year, but regardless, Bo was allowed to help negotiate due to him being a Vietnam veteran and a man that the FBI suspected Randy would respect. Luckily, for everyone involved, Randy did respect Bo, which would help to ease the tensions as negotiations began. Randy would prove to be right in his assessment of Bo Greitz as he confidently walked up to the front door to communicate with Randy one-on-one. Randy allowed Bo to enter his residence without incident. Bo was an honest man to the Weavers throughout the negotiations, and I can confidently say that he only wanted what's best for everyone involved. He even disclosed that he was wearing a wire and wanted the Weavers to be cautious of the things they say before anything came out. During this time, Randy had told Bo that his wife was dead, and that Kevin was severely wounded, along with a bunch of other stuff I'd love to tell you, but the feds blanked it out in their documents. Bo is in shock, especially hearing that Vicky was dead. Bo did his due diligence to inform all the agents of the news as he was coming off the hill, but not before making it explicitly clear that Randy needed to get off the hill and turn himself in. When the word of Vicky's death had hit the public, there was an outcry across the nation as to the true brutality and deception of the siege. People showed up in droves, from reporters to skinheads to Mothers of America to religious individuals and everyone in between. People even came in from as far as Georgia to participate in the protest happening 2 miles away from the cabin itself. Fortunately, on Sunday, Vicky's body was retrieved by Bo personally, who promised Randy that Vicky's body wouldn't touch the ground. He made sure to follow through on that promise by being with her until she was loaded in the truck and taken off the mountain. Before Bo walked out with Vicky, he told Randy that if Kevin doesn't come with him to get medical treatment, that he would personally testify against him in the event that Kevin was to die. Harris was also told that if he came down, they would leave Weaver alone. Obviously, the choice was clear. As Kevin was retrieved, he was taken immediately to the hospital and would go on to survive his injuries after 3 months of recovery. It wasn't until Monday the 31st at 9:40 a.m. that Weaver had finally surrendered to the feds. In the account of everyone, from the protesters to the kids themselves, they said that it was the most bizarre siege they had ever seen. In the account of Sarah, she said that it looked like a base camp you would see in Vietnam. There were APCs, Humvees, agents in shorts playing ball, big army-issued tents, along with just hundreds of agents ready to raid the Weaver cabin stationed all along the perimeter of the property. Randy, who still needed medical treatment due to his wounds, was then taken to the hospital, and his kids went in a separate car for further questioning by federal agents. At the end of the siege, Weaver and Harris were charged with a whole grocery list of crimes that never stuck. The prosecution at one point even wanted the death penalty for them both. During the trial in 1995, The jury came to the verdict of not guilty on all charges for Kevin and only guilty on one charge against Randy, which was his failure to appear in court. Randy would be sentenced to 18 months in prison with the recognition of 16 months served. So, I would say that given the situation in its entirety, Randy and Kevin received a fair trial despite their initial skepticism. As I stated earlier, people were up in arms after Vicky was killed and the truth started to come out. Public opinion was so in the favor of Randy and his family that the federal government organized a Ruby Ridge task force to prosecute the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and ATF agents and commanders who participated in the siege. They all got taken to court over negligence occurred at Ruby Ridge and the siege of the Branch Davidians at Waco, Texas, which many agents participated in both assignments. They were found in both cases to be guilty of, quote, serious wrongdoing. The court also made it clear that the ROEs for both predicaments were unconstitutional and needlessly ended the lives of otherwise innocent civilians, 25 of which were children at Waco. During this time, the prosecution was relentlessly seeking justice in the face of otherwise untrustworthy individuals. In 1997, Michael Coe, the chief of the FBI's Violent Crime Section, pled guilty to obstruction of justice for destroying a report which was critical of the agency's role at Ruby Ridge. He was then only sentenced to 18 months in prison and a $4,000 fine, which, in my opinion, is an extremely light slap on the wrist for destroying documents. Think about it this way. If you or me get caught in the same offense, it's at least 5 years in prison. Don't believe me? I suggest you look it up. So when it comes to destroying documents and trying to send an already beaten man to prison, I'd have to say that you should have gotten at least 5 years or more. Especially considering you're the chief of a department of the FBI with 26 years of experience, and you know what you're doing is wrong. Regardless of everything that happened against Kevin, Randy, and his kids, they each received a payout. Randy had received $80,000, Kevin had received $320,000, and each of Randy's daughters had received $800,000 each. This is all after taxes, of course, because even after the government tries to kill you, they're still gonna get their cut. All jokes aside, to this day, the FBI uses Ruby Ridge as a prime example of wrongful action taken by federal agents and teaches students of the mistakes made so that we never have to experience something like this again. So that brings us to the end of our long journey and my final thoughts on the situation. For starters, I'd have to say that if Randy had not cut down the shotguns, then this whole situation could have been avoided, but it was very enticing to someone hard on cash. I don't condone Randy's actions, but I also don't condone the ATF for entrapment. In my opinion, they were both in the wrong. As far as the siege itself, it was a disaster from start to finish for a few reasons. Not only did a whole 18-month investigation lead to completely false reports, but it was also just a waste of time and taxpayer dollars. Don't get me wrong, I definitely want people to be observed and reported on first before the ATF shoots your dog and kicks your door in, but the fact that the reports were all over exaggerated just made the situation a lot more hostile than it should have been to begin with. The whole fiasco at the Y intersection was just as bad. The fact that Deegan got shot by his own team member and then the U.S. Marshals tried to cover it up by putting the blame on Harris was probably the point of no return for the feds. I would say this makes sense as to why there were so many last-minute changes and confusion in the ROE about taking Weaver and Harris out. The situation probably wasn't going as well as the FBI had hoped, and they just wanted to secure any loose ends before the Weaver side of the story came out. Which then just led to an even bigger problem of killing an innocent woman and really just fumbling the operation from there. All in all, what happened on Ruby Ridge was a tragedy from both the Weavers and the U.S. Marshals' perspective. I think that many times, people in positions of power have the wrong mindset that leads to irrational thoughts and actions that ends up getting the wrong people killed. On the bright side, hindsight is 20/20, and because of botched operations like these, we can learn where mistakes were made on both sides and learn how to resolve similar complex issues in the future. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for watching. And a very special thank you to all of you who help support the channel by sharing videos, subscribing, sharing comments, and all that good stuff. This really wouldn't be possible without any of you guys. Until next time.